Could everybody take a seat and we'll get started? Try to keep things on schedule because we have a busy afternoon and evening. If you don't know me, I'm Trip Anderson. I'm the executive director here. Welcome to Ava Gallery and Art Center. We're thrilled to see so many people here, and we're thrilled to have one of our own, Wendy, here exhibiting in the main galleries. It's wonderful. Looking forward to hearing what she has to say, and certainly all of you are more than welcome to stay around for the reception, the official opening of all four of these exhibits at 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock this evening, so plan to stay for that. I will introduce Mila Pinnigan, our exhibition manager at AVA, who is responsible for hanging all this work, and she and Jen Bristol, who is around somewhere, have been working furiously all week to get this hung and lit for you all, and we're excited to hear what Wendy has to say. So Mila, if you'll introduce Wendy.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. Applause for the art. I just want to echo another warm welcome here to AVA this evening, and thank you so much for coming. It's been such a delight to work with Wendy. Her work is, I think, very much a reflection of who she is. It is bright and it is elegant, and it's just a pleasure to be around. She holds a Master's in Fine Arts and Graphic Design from the Vermont College of Fine Arts. And she's also part of an art collective based in San Francisco called Cherish. And if you haven't heard of it, I encourage you to look it up. They have a great collection of artists and designers work together. So I just want to say one more time that working with Wendy was such a delight. And I'm very much looking forward to living with this work for the next month. So without any further ado, Wendy Briggs Powell.
Thank you. Hi everybody, thank you so much for being here. It means so much to me to be in this space, to have the kind of people around me that support the arts, including all of you. And to have a studio upstairs, I just feel incredibly grateful. And not only to be able to make art and to be an artist, which is such a privilege, but also to be able to talk about it. So the fact that you all came here tonight to listen to me is really a treat. So thank you so much. So I thought I would break down my talk a little bit. The first part will be a little bit, I'm going to try and keep this all to about 15 minutes, and you're welcome to interrupt me at any time. The first part is a little bit of background and context, which will help you understand the work that's on the wall. And then I'm going to show a short 2-minute video that is just sort of how I do the work. And then I'll talk about what's on the walls here and what it means to me and why I do it. So I'm just starting with this, which is a kind of funny way to start. I am 12 years old. I just turned 12 in this picture, and I have my Dorothy Hamill haircut and my plaid shirt, and I won a poster contest. And I thought that was just so incredibly exciting because I had decided at that age that I wanted to be a graphic designer. And what that meant to me was it was about visually communicating with just the bare elements, but still getting your message through. And that's what I was trying to do then, and I think to some extent, regardless of the work I'm doing, that theme sort of still follows through. So the design piece was starting at that point. Back up for one sec. The other reason I wanted to start with this is because you can see her expression, you can see my expression, and there's such a difference between the two. And I felt so spirited and excited about this work, and I'm not so sure she feels the same. You know, that's part of what's happening. And so I like that because it's a reminder to myself that that 12-year-old spirit is there, and it's in each of us, and we're working with it all the time, but you sometimes have to remind yourself to get back there to plow through whatever life is throwing at you. So start with that. My dad is an architect, and his dad was an architect, and as children, we were not allowed to go to art school. We were not allowed to major in art. We were allowed to do art, but that was about it. And so I didn't have any formal training in graphic design, but my very first job that I did get sort of professionally as a designer was at US Lacrosse in Baltimore. And that was great. I was the art director, and I got to lay out the magazine and do their print material. And then I got married and had babies and moved up to New Hampshire, and I put things on hold for a little while. But I did some independent work, freelancing, things like birth announcements, and I did some note cards, stationery and that kind of thing. That was a stationery wardrobe, and it was meant to sort of coordinate the elements of your stationery set, and note cards and gift cards and all that kind of stuff. Just fun little projects like that. I became sort of obsessed with seaweed at one point, and I collected it on the beach, and I scanned it, and I worked with it, and I patterned it, and colored it, and made hundreds of cards with seaweed. And that form and working with the colors and the patterns still is something that I just love to do. So I made it big and poster size, and still working on sort of sea life and water and those kinds of organic forms. I put the seaweed on fabric, and I printed it, and had a friend who wanted that for some work in her house, and so we had fun with that. I then worked on some posters, again doing sort of pattern work. This was from some travel my family and I did, and you could see that the tightness, the designiness of it, which is what I love, and I like to think about that. I like to think about how all the parts relate and what I am communicating. But the more I do that and do it on the computer, the tighter I get. And that tightness it was sort of reinforcing parts of my personality that I wasn't so psyched about. Will you back up for 1 second, Dawn? And the limitations that the computer is such a great tool, and it's so important for design work. And you can make everything perfect, and I really appreciate that. But it was making me do this. And there's a screen in front of you, and your range of motion is small, and there aren't a lot of smells and textures, and it was feeling like very constricting to me. So I moved on to try and create some of the same forms and bold color and shapes, but in using my hand more. So I did some silkscreen work. These are my 3 active children, and then just some bold upfront animal owl work. And then this was a mushroom cap that we saw on one of our trips. It was in Zimbabwe, and it was just white, but the texture of it was so spectacular that I just worked with it and again played with the pattern. And I get sort of involved and excited about these organic forms and shapes, and then working with them. So that all led me to a piece of what you're seeing here. I was starting, I was actually midway through my MFA degree in graphic design at UCLA. And the reason that program was so great for me is because it really encouraged all the students to explore, to break down all those barriers that I talked about with me getting so tight, and really focus on communicating what you wanted to say. And because it's a design program, that's more a visual way of communicating. But I had to really work to break all that down and to find meaning in work that was less structured and really as simple as it possibly could be. So it was an Easter Sunday, and I was dyeing eggs with my family, and I started just putting the paper into the water and getting these really cool results. And it had a feel to it that, again, wasn't tight, it was loose, and so that was really speaking to me. I started to write stories about what the marks meant to me. And this is actually I did a project called Story Slices, where I'm just capturing and slicing off a snippet of, in this case, 2 internal dialogues mimicking these marks on the side. And it was a way of sort of integrating the text into the work, and I had fun thinking about the meaning and how I could relate it all back to me. So that was just, keeps sort of evolving, until I just started to get bigger and bigger and drop the text and work with what, try to communicate again as simply and visually in an abstract form, sort of what I'm thinking about and feeling about inside. That because it's abstract, I think people who look at it can relate in whatever way they want to. Whatever it means to them, they can project onto it. And that was very appealing to me. So I got bigger, and then this, if you could do it, Mila, this is just a very amateur little video that I did really early on with Charlotte, but it will show you a little bit about how I make the work. This was in my basement at home before I got the gorgeous studio upstairs. So this is fabric dye, and that's what's allowing it, I think, such vibrance. So that gives you a little sense of how I do the work, and it has evolved slightly from there. But the why I do the work and the what it means to me is, first of all, it is so exciting to see this here in this way, because it feels like such private internal work, even though I know everyone can relate to it. One of the things that we talked a lot about in my program at VCFA is, again, like, because you can communicate in a visual way, what is it that you want to say? What is the most important thing to you? And I feel that, I guess the root of what I got to was that the most important thing to me is how I feel about myself, how well I know myself, how well I can look at all the pieces of myself, even the parts that I really don't want to look at because it's hard, and because I might not like them, and I might want to gloss over them, or present a different face to the world. And to be able to look at those things closely, but not totally attached to them, and by not attaching to them, I've created just enough space to find another way of communicating it. And so to me, this is that gap. This is that place in between what the world throws at you and how you take it in and how you then respond. And so it's sort of everything, emotionally and physically, and interactions, and it's about relationships. And I had to just create enough distance so that something else could emerge, and so that I don't find myself in the world at least I'm just more conscious of how I am, how I treat others, because that is, I think, how we all treat ourselves starts with how we treat, how we treat each other starts with how we treat ourselves. And I think it's important to get as close to what that means as possible so that you can really do your best work in the world and connect all of us. So that is really what this means to me, and I think it taps into the heart more than the head. And again, I think bypassing that logical part of ourselves is what is so appealing to me, and what I hope all of us can walk away with. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the work, and I hope some of that made sense. Yes,
As a
Pete?
proud owner of one of those horizontal pieces,
Yes.
I can't figure out how you are able to put the paper in the water and go to the next stripe without changing the first stripe.
Well, you do. You do change the first stripe, and that's part of that overlapping in the layers, so I appreciate that question. So in that case where the pink and the sort of turquoise and that sort of mustardy color, I believe the turquoise was first, and the mustardy is really more of a chartreuse, but once it sits and saturates for sometimes days, sometimes these pieces sit for days in the containers of water, I can get that kind of a bold mark. This is something much more of a wash. It's sort of, these have hardened over time, sort of, and then this is just a wash. And so this is that color, just not as saturated. But I might, in some cases, I've washed over with a totally different color, and it creates a very different effect. And again, that is why this work is so appealing to me, not just what it means to me and in terms of what the forms mean to me and the colors mean to me, but also the process is so unpredictable. And it's that unpredictable nature that I was so seeking when I was doing the tight work. And I needed a way to really just, whatever's going to come out. So I am definitely guiding and allowing and to some degree designing, but it is totally the water that leaves the mark. And there's such beauty in that to me. And it just feels like I am much more, in conversation with the materials and working with them. And it's a reminder for me to be in conversation and working with life and not just trying to get it to fit into that thing that I want it to fit into, because it just doesn't really work like that. And this allows me to access the freedom of that kind of exploration and looking at the marks that are left. Like when this giant one was so much fun to make, and I had two big splash pools, like kiddie pools, to do that, because the paper's big and the water's heavy, so I had to find ways around it. And I didn't know what was going to come out, and that came out. And if I tried so hard with a paintbrush in my hand, I couldn't do that, or I couldn't do exactly that, and it wouldn't have the organic feel that this does, and that I think a lot of these pieces do. And that is part of the that I was hoping to get.
Question for you. Do you have an intention? So you start with this big, huge piece of paper and certain colors. Do you have an intention when you start? And I'm assuming that changes in the process, because this is such a not a fluid process.
In some cases, yes. Or if not an intention, an idea of what I want the outcome to be. And that's not always the best way to approach it, but there's one behind here, that sort of pink and bluish one, I call that sort of more groovy kind of one. I definitely had an intention about what I wanted that to look like and feel like. And you can see that's more controlled. And there's a piece of working with a large container of water over many days with a piece of paper that you don't know what it's going to do. There's a piece of the control that's kind of fun, like, oh, can I make it do this? But ultimately, I think, so I approach it that way sometimes, and then other times I say, I'm going to do some pink right here, and then I walk away. And I come back and I see what I've got, And then that's when I start to build the piece in terms of what does it need, what
Interesting.
what is that going to say now? Yeah. Yes.
It looks as though there's a front side and a back side, one side and another side.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yes. That was the other real fun part of this work. Because it's solid, most artists are working alone and it's sort of solitary, your head goes to wherever your head's going to go. And I would tell myself a lot of stories, and they might be stories about things that had happened, or I'd replay something, or telling myself a story about myself that's either not positive or who knows, just your head goes to wherever it's going to go. And I was working on the gray and yellow piece over there, and I was actually working on the other side, and I had this idea of how I wanted it to look, and when I flipped it over and saw the way those two grays met, I was just like, this is spectacular, I'm so excited. And it becomes this, again, like it's the spontaneity of it and the magic that can happen. And I also like the idea that I might be telling myself one story, but there's always the other side, and there's always another side. And in every case, that's true. And some days are really, the other side's really messy, and it's not anything you would want, necessarily to look at all the time. But thank you for mentioning that, because that's a really fun part of the work. Yes?
Maybe you said this and I missed it, but how did you color the water? With what?
With fabric dye. So when I was doing the little strips, I was using the Paws Easter egg dye because that's all I knew how to do, and it was little containers and little paper. So I started with that, and I'm not sure, I don't know, I guess I just assumed if I'm gonna need more of this, I need fabric dye. And I found this, it's called jacquard dye, and it comes in a powder, and I can mix the powders, and sometimes I mix the liquid, sometimes I mix the powder. It all eventually becomes the liquid. Also, what's interesting, and again, it's a point of discovery, is that, I'm trying to think if there's one I can show you. When some of the colors, depending on when it goes in, they'll separate just slightly. And so, actually there was a piece in the video where it was a green arc, but when I pulled it out, the wash color, this little washiness was like a bright blue. And that's just because of the way I mixed it initially. And so, I'm still learning about what the fabric dye does, and it does different things to different paper. And this paper, what I love about it, it's a Crane's letterpress paper. It's very thick, and so it warps a little, but it mostly stays together. It's got a good structure for this, and because other papers, they'll just do other things. This big one, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I will try and. So I'm just trying new paper and to figure that out all the time too. But it will react differently with the dyes and just show up a little differently each time and with each paper.
So what kind of paper is that you use?
The big one or these most of them?
Mostly your smaller ones?
It's Crane's. Do you know Crane's are sort of a stationery company? And they make a letterpress paper it's just very thick. I'm sorry, I don't have a piece to just let you hold, but it's
And how long does it take for one of yours to dry before you can frame it?
it's probably only a day to dry. This might sit for it could sit for up to 4 or 5 days. So to just depending on the strength of the dye and the length of time that it saturates. But when it actually dries, it's maybe a day, maybe 2. The other thing is you might have been able to see a little bit from the video is the container shape matters. So to get the horizontal straighter lines or to get the wavier mountainy lines, it's a deep sort of narrow container. To get there's a piece on the back wall behind Mila that was rested for many days in a shallow container. And what's really neat about that is that those marks were left, and to me that's tracing the evaporation and showing the effect of time. And again, like that isn't something I could have really planned. And it sat so beautifully, I thought, on its own that I left it, and that's how it is. That green one up there, that very vibrant green one is similar. I sort of answered what it gave me with those other tones. And again, Pete, back to your question, that was some more just layering of colors over it, just to see how I could maybe tone it down, even though the yellow isn't really toned down. I don't know, just to get the feel that I wanted it to have. Just trying to think, and so some of those more organic shapes, this is from just sitting mostly in shallower containers. The deeper, darker marks are a little bit more controlled, and the paper doesn't move and the water doesn't evaporate in the same way. Yes.
So you said you did cards and stuff before. Now these are all original. Do you do pictures of these prints that you sell also, or you just sell your original?
I don't have prints. I have photographed them in a way to make cards, note cards. So I have done that, not with all of them, but with a small group of them. I'm always documenting my work so that I have that for that purpose. But I think it would be so great to have that be, posters that you could print hundreds. That would be so fun. And I guess the way to do it would be either to work from a good photograph or to have scanned the original. You need kind of a big scanner to be able to do that. Yeah, I think that would be neat. They kind of lend themselves to that because they are so, they're just sort of easy that way, I guess. Yes.
I think what's so interesting that I think about an artist knowing what they're going to paint and knowing what scene or what idea or what they have in their head. And then you said that you didn't want it to be completely that way. And I think the natural process that happens when you don't quite know how it's going to come out is such a wonderful thing to put together with what you have brought to it. And I just realized that the natural is part of it as well. And that really grabbed me.
Thank
That
you.
it's not just you saying, I'm going to make two big blue things. You sort of wait to see, and then it's like it's something else that comes in. And I think that's just beautiful.
Well, you put it so well, so thank you so much for saying it that way, because that is the piece that the water and the color, that was what I had to work with in terms of trying to reflect back on life and why. And so I love that you said that when you just sit and wait and you work with what happens, we can't always do that. We don't want to always do that. But when we can just pause long enough to say, okay, I'm going to do that, you never know what's going to show up. And that part's really fun. So, yeah. Thanks, special. Thank you.
After you've got it all dry and everything, do you spray it with anything to keep the color there? And I notice these over here don't seem to have any glass or plastic over them, but yet these over here, I'm not close enough, I can't tell if it's plastic covering it to protect it.
These actually do have an acrylic plexiglass on them.
All right.
But I don't spray them. But those two rather shiny, sort of the reddish and the bluish, that are a little different from the others, that is, the process that I use there is that I glue the watermark onto a wooden panel, and then I coat it with resin. And the resin is messy and a little hard to work with. I'm getting better at it, but what I really love about that process is that I love how that looks. And it reminds me more of how I'm working when it's under the water and I can see what's happening because it almost preserves it and it looks like it's underwater. So I like it for that reason. I also like it for the reason when I get back to the pattern and how I like to work in pattern. It allows or it will allow me, I haven't done it here, but to create the way you would create a fabric pattern where you tile it all. It will allow me to do that. And so that's kind of a fun shape and way to work with those.
So Wendy, is that a direction that you're moving into now?
Well, interestingly, it's complementing the work that I'm doing now, but the reason I got to that, and my friend Carolyn knows this, is because I ended up sending work to London a year and a half ago. And when I discovered, with 2 weeks to go, how much it was going to cost to ship my work, I was like, no, I can't do that. I need to figure something else out. And so I figured that out. I'm not sure how, but I could get, I don't know, I think I had 18 of them into a box or two, and that was a much more reasonable way to ship it over. So that, again, came out of a kind of a problem, but it was a great solution, and I'm so happy to, I want to keep exploring with that. So the part that is tricky, and as I said, I've gotten better, is the actual resin, because it's messy, it sticks to everything, it takes a long time to dry, it gets air bubbles, and so those ones are pretty good, but they're never perfect. Sorry.
No,
Wait,
ask
Molly,
someone else first.
Well, is there a particular color that you have a new relationship with, or is there a color that you feel like you're not, like that you're drawn to or pulled away from, or that you've been working so intimately with just color?
So much color, and I hate to limit myself, as you can tell. I had someone come into my studio, I don't know, a year ago or something, and they sort of said like, well, when are you going to just sort of get serious about a few colors or something? And that was a fine comment to make, only because it got me thinking like, wow, I really do. I just like the whole gamut, and it's hard for me to limit myself that way. I'll tell you that I feel very fortunate that a lot of designers like my work. I think because it can go in a number of different places, it's cheery and bright, and so they can use it. They all want blues and greens, it seems. So I've been doing a lot more blues and greens. So I do feel like I'm getting, and you'll see, there are a few blues and greens here, but I have to really tweak to get a blue. The dyes, maybe I just haven't experimented enough, but the dyes, it's a little different than mixing paint. And so I'm doing my best to create the kinds of colors I think I want to see. I don't always achieve it, but so I feel like I'm having a little bit of a relationship with blues and greens. I always like the pink, even though I don't think there are that many people who really want pink on their walls, but I love the pink, so I play with it, and sometimes it has to be toned down a little, mustard, but there are very few colors I don't like or don't want to work with, at least in a more vibrant palette. Obviously the real, soft neutrals I'm not as good with. And I think that has just something to do with the bold contrast that is sort of reflective of most of my work. Yes.
How do you feel about the wrinkles in the paper?
I don't love it. They actually each have some wrinkles. What I tell myself is that it really is it feels a little more sculptural. It's a little bit more of a sculptural process. It's not just on the surface, as you commented, it's on both sides, and so in that sense it's three-dimensional to some extent. In order to get rid of this, I would need a very special drying rack, especially at that size, where I would have to soak that paper again and have it dry between blotting paper for a long time. I think it's doable. I decided I didn't mind them enough to do that. But I know that is, I understand why people struggle with sort of the warp underneath the glass.
It creates an electrical relationship between the two shapes.
Well, that's a beautiful thing to say. That answer much more.
Magnetism.
Yeah, and maybe they are trying to draw it together. I like that reading of it.
Is that the one entitled River? If it's not, it should be.
It's, I think it's Rockin' That River?
Something else, but that could be titled River Through the Rocks or
Right.
something, so it gives a sense of undulation
That's so true.
and movement.
That's so true.
So take advantage of the river.
And again, right, it's like, this is what life gives us, right? So I love that interpretation. Thank you. I really like that. I'm definitely gonna go with that.
Just curious about the different ways different water affects your work, because I know you use a bunch of different waters, and so I have a couple of questions. One was, is there a favorite water that you've had that's been really fun to work with? And if there's pond water with organic matter, I'm assuming that that affects the white, and I'm just curious, and have you worked with salt water?
I love how you're interested in this, Emily.
Oh.
I have worked with different water, and one wonderful way to do this work, as again, some of you know, is because I feel that the water is what's left the mark. I'm allowing, but it's the water, along with the fabric dye, allowing us to see what the water has done. The water is really sacred in that way, and I am a water person, and so I really appreciate that aspect of it. So in order to create some custom work for people, they have gathered water, which is heavy again, so it limits the scope of the work if they're looking for 100% pureness of the water that they've collected. But in a place that's special to them, if they bring me that water, I can use that to work with. And so the marks that are left now have another meaning, and that makes it really special and connects them to the piece in a way. And to me, that's real. I mean, that is so personal. That is the water really expressing itself. So I think that I haven't worked with maybe saltwater or pond water or lake water enough to know, because of the limitations on access, to know how different the dyes would work and the paper works. The one thing I have noticed is that the salt, and I've tried to add table salt to the water to see, or even table salt to the wet mark to see what sort of, can you make another reaction? I haven't been very successful with that, but the salt water that I have collected and used the dyes with, it has a little bit of softness, a little bit of graininess. That's, I'm sorry, I can't show you up here, and I'm not sure that it would be that obvious, but that is something that I noticed. So that would take probably more exploration. And I really wish I knew more about chemistry, because I think someone who did could really do a lot.
Because you just think that, like the water that in a normal tap would have maybe fluoride and some chlorine, you know, a town water
Right.
versus well, I don't know, just so much to that. But
I'm sure, I don't know visually what you can tell, but I think it all has an effect. Thank you.
it all looks like it would play really well in fabrics. Have you been approached by fabric companies?
I'm still waiting for that call. No, I haven't. I've tried to do the fabric directly in the water, which is the more traditional way of working with fabric dye. I haven't done it enough, so maybe there are ways to do it, but because it's more porous, I can't get this kind of effect. So it would have to be printed like the swoon flower fabric. So I can take an image and then it could be surface printed. But in terms of creating the fabric that way,
That's what I thought Garnet Hill was going to do with you.
well, you know, I just maybe some. But I mean, so many of these are just pillows to me, especially those like, you know, those sort of mod ones. I'll just say one other thing about this one. This one was, again, like talk about a happy accident. The symmetry of that, again, I placed the paper in the water the way I wanted to place it, and I left it. And I couldn't believe I came back with that. And you have to be super careful when you lift it up not to ruin those marks. And again, if you do, you do, and then it becomes something else. But I'm so happy that I was able to preserve that curve because again, that was not intended. I didn't expect that. And it also, if you look up closely, there's this, whatever, I don't remember exactly what I mixed in here. Obviously a blue, but I think there was some steely grays in there also. The residue of some of that, because it was in the shallow container and the water evaporated, the residue created this sort of sheen and the shine and gives it this gold sparkle that if you look up close, that again, I just feel so grateful that it worked out that way. This yellow one behind here has a similar feel. You can see that. Anyone have any more questions?
One more question.
Yes.
A whole nother creative process is how you title these pieces.
Yeah.
So how much time, energy, effort goes into saying this is what it means?
I don't spend a lot of time on that, and one of the reasons is because I want your meaning to come through. What you see when you look at it is mostly what I want to happen. I know I have to title them. I mean, I suppose I could have them untitled, but what I do, I think, harkens back a little bit to those story slices, where I'm just creating these tiny snippets of life, and that's usually what comes out, and that's usually how I title them.
Okay, pretty much spontaneous.
Not always, but not always, but often, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I just really, again, thank you all so much for being here. I'm so grateful. It's really a privilege to be able to talk about this and to have you all listen. So thank you very much.